Good day, and welcome to Lesson 14 in our study of the book of Galatians. Today we're going to continue in chapter 6 and do verses 6 to 10. This is a short passage, but it does have a lot in it. So verse 6 starts off with, "Let him who has taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches." So what he's saying is the person who teaches and the person who is taught. So let the person who is taught share in all good things. Now in those days, particularly, people who would teach the gospel, people who would preach, who would go around and go from city to city or town to town walking, and they would be dependent upon others for their food, for any lodging that they might need, any kind of accommodation. So these people who teach would be particularly dependent upon those people who were being taught. And this is what he's saying, let those who are being taught, let him who is taught the word, share in all good things with him who teaches. And this was particularly true because of the society in which they lived at that time. And there was a great deal of discrepancy between the rich and the poor. Paul is saying that people who are taught and understand the word should share whatever they have, whether it's financial, whether it's accommodations, whether it's comforting, whether it's just support, that they should share with those people who teach and with others. So it's a matter of being generous to all people. And this is exemplified in a number of passages in the Bible, that hoarding or keeping everything for yourself is not the way it should be. In Luke chapter 16, there's a story of the rich man and Lazarus, a beggar at the rich man's gate, who stayed there and suffered while the rich man had plenty. And then both died. And Lazarus was in Abraham's bosom, where the rich man was in Hades. And in Luke 16, verse 11, it says, "Abraham said to the rich man, 'Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented.'" In other words, what happens in your life is made up for in the afterlife. The same thing applies in Luke chapter 12, when he spoke a parable around a certain rich man who yielded plentifully. The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. This is in chapter 12, starting at verse 16. "And he thought within himself, saying, 'What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops?' So he said, 'I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will these things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich towards God.'" So Paul is saying to the Galatians, let him who is taught, let him who understands the gospel, not just lay up stuff for himself, but share in all good things with others, with those who teach and with the poor people. So it's not just laying up for people who teach, but laying up and being generous towards everyone. And then he follows with saying, "Do not be deceived, for God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life." So this goes along with the first verse we read. Let he who understands the gospel share everything with those who are poor, with those who teach, with those of other means. And then he says, don't deceive yourself. Don't think that you can say one thing and not do it, or you can say one thing and do another. And don't say that you can sort of pretend you are something you're not and get away with it, because God is not going to be taken advantage of. He's not going to be put in a position where he's snubbed. God is not to be mocked. For whatever you do, that will you reap. Whatever you sow, that will you reap. For what a man sows, that he will also reap. If you sow only to the flesh, only to what is considered worldly, if you sow only to secular things, if you sow only to your own advantage, your own satisfaction, to satisfy your own being, if it is all you do, then you're going to in the end reap corruption. But if you sow into heavenly things, if you sow into spiritual things, then you will reap life everlasting. This is what he's saying. What you sow, you will reap. And the principle here is, first you have to sow something. You have to put your talents, your means, your ideas, your enthusiasm somewhere. You have to sow it somewhere. Secondly, what you sow, you will reap. What you sow, you will reap. You have an investment in what you put in somewhere, and you have an identity in what you put it into. Then if you sow it, like a farmer sowing seed, one seed will lead to a crop of many vegetables, many fruits, one seed will lead to many seeds, is what he's saying. So there will be an increase in whatever you sow into. That's what he's saying. So be careful what you sow into. If you sow into the flesh, you of the flesh reap corruption. He who sows into the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. And again, this is taken from an agricultural type of theme. Many people, and most people in those days, were farmers or had farming, and they knew that if you sowed something and you sowed it properly and you sowed it in the right place, then you would reap a harvest. But they also knew that once you put your seed in the ground, there was some time before the crop or the yield was evident. And this is what he's saying here. Let us not grow weary, because there's a time between when you sow. Whatever you do, whether you're sowing into the flesh or sowing into the Spirit, there's a time before that comes back as a harvest of the flesh or a harvest of the Spirit. There's a time. And if you're sowing into the Spirit, don't be discouraged. Don't get discouraged because nothing seems to be happening right away. You don't see results instantly. Don't get discouraged, because if you wait, if you're patient, if you have enough time, then you will see the reward and see the harvest. Many times people themselves don't live to see all that they have planted grow to fruition. It may be decades, generations later before the actual complete harvest of what they have sown is evident. So do not lose heart. Do not lose heart, because we shall reap in due time. Therefore, he says, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. Because it is important to be generous to all people, to all persons, in all circumstances. But even more so, it is important to be considerate and care for those people who are in your own surroundings, who are in your own body, who are in your own circumstances, or you're involved in your circumstances. If you have a church, it's important to be considerate, and especially considerate to those people within that church or that body or that group. So it says, be considerate to all, but especially of those who are of the household of faith. It says in Hebrews 6:10, God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love which you have shown towards the name, towards his name. In 2 Thessalonians 3:13 it says, but as for you, brethren, do not grow weary in doing good. Don't give up. Don't expect an immediate return of what you do, but just don't grow weary in it. Have patience, and there will be a harvest, or will be a reward later on. In due season, we will reap if we do not lose heart. Do good to all. Do not do evil, but do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. It says in 1 John, we know, 1 John 3 verse 14, we know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren, the ones in the household of faith. He who does not love his brother abides in death. And in 4:20, if someone says, I love God, but hates his brother, he is a liar. So you must love the ones, especially in the household, in your surroundings of faith. You must especially love those and do good to them particularly, but also do good to everyone. So what he's saying here, be generous. Be generous to those who teach. Be generous to those with whom you're involved. Be generous to those in every aspect of life, actually, but particularly to those who are in your household of faith. And don't misunderstand things. God knows what you're doing, and he knows what your intent is. He knows what your actions are. So if you try to deceive him, you're only deceiving yourself. God is not going to be mocked. He is not going to take things lightly that you say you're going to do, but don't do. Or if you do one thing, or say one thing and then do something else. Be honest. Be honest with God. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with other people. If not, you're really mocking God. And if you only sow into that type of activity, if you're sowing only into what you can obtain yourself, what you can get out of this world, if you're only sowing into your flesh, then you're heading for destruction. If you're sowing into spiritual things, if you're sowing into the spiritual aspect, into God's kingdom, then you're heading more towards everlasting life. And this is the lessons of both in Luke, with Lazarus and the rich man, where one person had everything during this lifetime, the other had nothing, but everything was reversed afterward. And about the person who was building bigger barns because he had so much, he didn't know what to do with it all. So he wanted to build everything bigger and better and probably more expensive. But God said, your spirit's going to be demanded of you tonight. What are you going to do with all this? It's not going to be you who's going to be enjoying it. It's going to be someone else. So put some aspect into what is heavenly bound. It says, lay up not your treasures on earth, where rust will corrode, and thieves may come in and steal, but put them in heaven, where there's neither rust nor thievery. And that's really what this whole part of chapter 6 is about. Be generous with one another. Be generous with the poor. Be generous with those who don't have as much as you do. And sow some seed into spiritual things, into heavenly things, and not all into secular and things of mammon. One cannot serve two masters entirely. For one, he will either hate the one and despise the other, or else he would love the one and not the other. So you can't serve two masters. Sow into heavenly things and reap everlasting life. Sow into mammon things of mammon entirely, and seek your destruction. This is what he's saying. Be generous. Don't try to deceive God. Don't try to mock him. He is not to be mocked. But be generous to others, especially of those in your own household of faith. So we'll go on next week and finish up this chapter 6 and then get into another Bible study after that. So that's all for today. Bye for now, and thanks for watching. Hope to see you again next week.